Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in for our discussion about organizing during COVID-19 in the South. My name is Kit. I'm an organizer in Jacksonville, Florida. And before we get started, the first thing I just want to say is just make sure that your microphones are on mute if you're joining us in Zoom. And if you have any questions, just type them in the chat and we'll come back around to them at the end to save time. So, the first thing I want to bring up is the fact that we're even having a discussion dedicated to organizing in the South. So when we say the South, I'm sure there are images that pop into everyone's mind, but what do we actually mean by that? So in the Southern United States, there's an oppressed nation known as the Black Belt Nation. What we mean by that is that the majority of Black Americans are in the southeast of the country. So, with population, there comes culture. With culture, there comes pride. There's a lot of Black pride down here. There's a lot of Black culture down here that you don't see in other parts of the country. But also, there comes a very dark history, which bleeds into our present. And there comes racism and there comes state repression. So, what does that mean? There is our present. In the South, we have remnants of slavery, we have the remnants of Jim Crow, and to this day, we still have some of the harshest Republican terror and Democratic complacency. We see it reflected not only in racist vigilante crimes, but also just in the lack of funding to state institutions such as education, as well as in the low-wage jobs with little to no union power. So, we basically have a plantation model in our workforce here as well in the South. We have the lowest wages nationwide. The question now is, what does this mean for organizers fighting for Black liberation in the South? What does this mean for people who are fighting for LGBTQ liberation? People who are fighting for Latino and Indigenous liberation? Well, it means a lot of things. For me as a teacher and an organizer, it means that unfortunately, I am beaten and unlawfully arrested by the police, even though I'm well within my constitutional rights to protest, which is exactly what happened to me in April of 2017. Meanwhile, we have right-wing fascist protests, armed protesters storming Capitol buildings right now with no police brutality to be seen anywhere. Unfortunately, though, it also means that I get to wake up and go to work every day in a school that is literally falling apart. The buildings are crumbling. The children, they're forced to learn white history through the curriculum that's being made here by our lawmakers. And then at the end of it all, they get to receive a diploma that says the President of the Confederacy's name on it. Our school is named after Jefferson Davis. So these are things, that we wake up and have to deal with every day here that have become or that are considered normal, but are actually pretty egregious and bleed into the culture here. Throw in a global pandemic on top of all of that, and it adds a chaos into our lives because we are already seen as expendable. But now we're also being threatened with facing a fatal disease and working without hazard pay or starvation from not working. So we have a lot of issues in the South that are very specific to this region, but that doesn't mean the fight ends. A lot of people get discouraged. A lot of people will say, well, why don't you just move? Because this is our nation. This is the Black Belt Nation. We're going to fight for it. And we have just the fighters here to do it. So I'm super excited to announce some of our panelists. And first, we're going to hear from an organizer who's actually in my town of Jacksonville, Florida, Michael Sampson. So Michael has organized in Tallahassee as well as Washington, D.C. before moving back to Jacksonville to help co-found the Jacksonville Community Action Committee, a Black-led organization fighting for community control of the police. He has been organizing for Black liberation for years, and he's been a member of Road Socialist Organization since 2011. And I'm glad to work with him to make our city a better place. So Michael, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina, so much for the introduction. I appreciate being able to be here and even kind of share my experiences organizing the African-American nation, but as well as kind of go into a little bit of why we do what we do and, why is it that we're, facing a special kind of oppression in the South, which we would classify as national oppression. So I've been a member of the Road Socialist Organization since 2011. Started in Tallahassee, like Christina said. Got involved with the movement for student rights, but then got involved with the movement for justice for Trayvon Martin. And so I moved back to Jacksonville. Like Christina said, we helped co-found an organization called the Jacksonville Community Action Committee. And it really started around the police repression of peaceful protesters like Christina and a few others in April of 2017. And what we realized, and it's always been known in Jacksonville, we've always had a huge issue with JSO and police crimes going unchecked. From our analysis, really started living in the Black Belt, living in the African American nation. Police terror is like the cutting edge of that national oppression, which leads to mass incarceration, which leads to kind of other campaigns that I'll talk about more. So, Jackson has a large Black population that has been kind of materially disenfranchised due to efforts for decades to take away political power from African Americans. And what that has led to is a lack of, funding for social services for the inner city Black population. Has led to widespread police killings as well as widespread mass incarceration of African Americans. So with the COVID-19 crisis, one of the things we realized, and one of the things that other folks around the country realize, is that under COVID-19, prisons are essentially potential death camps. And in Jacksonville, when COVID-19 initially kind of really popped off, our prison, Duval County Jail, is designed to hold 2,189 inmates. It was currently then holding 3,000 inmates. And that kind of ties into how mass incarceration is a means in a lot of ways for profit to be had for those who are invested in the prison and industrial complex. So, we put out a call uniting with calls from the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, which the JCAC is an affiliate of, to free all those who can be freed from the jails, to prevent the jails from becoming death camps. So on I believe it was April 24th, we organized with the Northside Coalition, a few other groups like Dignity Florida, who had done some work around prisoners in the past. We organized a caravan event where we had around 36 cars who circled on the Duval County Jail for about an hour or so, just demanding the release of those prisoners. We got a lot of media coverage. A lot of folks, who saw us driving and wanted to hop in and, hop in the line and ride around the jail. And it was pretty cool. We put out a few demands. One of those was the release of all nonviolent offenders and the wrongfully incarcerated. Another demand was testing for all prisoners, inmates, and staff, free medical care for all prisoners, inmates, and staff, and as well as the immediate release of prison inmates over 60 and those who are medically compromised, with a medically compromised immune systems. And also one of the bigger things is sanitation reports that wasn't really happening from the sheriff's office in regards to how they were dealing with prisoners. It's one of the things, I think like one inmate got a bar of soap. If they lost it, they had to buy another one. And I mean, that just doesn't really make sense. So after we did our action, actually, a report came out in the paper that the prison population had dropped in Jacksonville 21%, which is a positive thing, but it's still overpopulated according to the numbers that we got. Prison is still kind of overpopulated by a few hundred folks. So that called into question, the demand and the need to still free all those who can be free from the jails. Because I always kind of, African Americans and the national oppression we face in the African American nation, in the Black Belt, we face kind of a genocide in the prisons and outside of the prisons as well, which kind of ties into, our campaign has historically been, working with folks in the community, and kind of definitely been inspired by what they was doing with the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. in Jacksonville fighting for a JPAC, a Jacksonville Police Accountability Council, which would have which would be all elected council of individuals from the community that would sit aboard, that would sit on a council and basically have the power and the influence to oversee JSO, have higher firepower, have the ability to subpoena evidence, have the ability to get all the evidence necessary, because it's obvious in Jacksonville, we've never had a police officer who's been indicted for murder or really indicted for any major crimes. They always tend to, cut a deal with the state attorney's office or something like that. So we felt, we felt and we still feel the need to fight for a JPAC and fight for community control of the police. But one of the, the wildest things that we've seen is, we fought with families. One of the biggest things that we do is build a relationship with victims' families of police crimes and fight with them to get justice. And a notorious case, let's say in December 2019, was the family of Jamie Johnson, who we've been uniting and fighting with. He was a young African-American college student, actually from Tallahassee, visiting family here. And he was killed by a JSO officer, Jose Garega. And we immediately, we had a rally and whatnot, and calling for the release of body cam footage. So I'd say that to say that JSO has had body cam footage since 2017 and has refused to release any body cam footage. They've released 2 body cam footage, one in which it shows them shooting a dog to justify, hey, this dog was running up on us. And the second one was when they arrested like an 11-year-old at a school. And they did that just to show, hey, we were nice to this child. But when it comes to families like Jamie Johnson, like Kwame Jones, who was killed in January, like Reginald Boston, who was killed in January, young African-American men, they have yet to release the body cam footage or release any evidence that the family has been demanding and asking for. So we actually, united with calls and had a rally this previous Friday. So of course, less than an hour away from Jacksonville is Brunswick, Georgia. And Brunswick, Georgia was the site of, a lynching of a young African-American man, Ahmaud Arbery, who was going for a jog and was killed by Gregory and Travis McMichael, 2 kind of racist vigilantes. And of course, in Jacksonville, Jacksonville and Florida in general, we have a history of racist vigilante, like high profile cases, like Jordan Davis, a young African-American man who was killed by a racist vigilante outside of a gas station in Jacksonville, who's Michael Dunn was the name of him. And thankfully he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. However, we also had the Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. And unfortunately, George Zimmerman wasn't convicted. He was actually exonerated and due to a horrible prosecution by the state. And that's one of the things we have to deal with down in the Deep South, is a state attorney's office that works hand in hand with with the cops, hand in hand with the mayors or whatever, to kind of restrict our ability to get justice through that process. So we had a rally here actually Friday, a socially distant rally. We tried to maintain everybody, keep their 6 feet. If folks want to stay in their cars, stay in their cars. And we called for justice for Ahmaud Arbery. We know that the day before the McMichaels were arrested, but like I said earlier, with Trayvon Martin case, an arrest doesn't necessarily equal a conviction. And that by itself, a conviction, doesn't stop the root issue of white supremacist national oppression, which is why we fight for community control of the police, which is why we fight to free prisoners from the jails who shouldn't even be there. Like the fact that you have these prisons, who, are releasing hundreds of people and saying that it's because of COVID, it just shows us that those folks shouldn't be in jail in the first place. And that's kind of what we're fighting for. So with the rally on Friday and demanding justice for Ahmaud Arbery, a socially distant rally, we also called for try to tie that back locally with our own issues with the state attorney's office Melissa Nelson, who has yet to press charges against any police officer for any police crime. We tied that back to our sheriff's office here, who has yet to release any body cam footage. And we just kind of tied that back to our own local conditions. And we had a good turnout. We had around 200 people who came out. So I think that was awesome. And like I said, that's part of my whole thought process. And our whole thought process, we have to make sure that folks who are in prison, who are, mass enfranchised and incarcerated, we can't face genocide in jail and outside of jail. We have to free them all, and we have to fight for justice. So I think, especially in regards to the COVID response, a lot of liberals up north make fun of the South, and you have these racist right-wing governments in power in the South who don't believe that COVID is an actual thing. You know what I'm saying? So for example, in Georgia, they had the reopening of the economy while they had added cases of COVID. And in other states, you have similar issues across the South. So we just have to be aware of that. But that's what we're doing in Jacksonville to fight back. We're building a movement to free the prisoners, building a movement for community control of the police. And also on the, upcoming, I think we're going to have to build a movement to fight against these draconian austerity measures that are eventually going to be happening with a lot of these state and local governments who already weren't funding public services and education and healthcare. They're going to use this as an excuse to cut that even more so. So that's what we're doing here. We're trying to fight back, and I'm happy I was on to kind of speak a little bit about the stuff that we've been doing in Jacksonville.
All right, Michael, Samson, everybody, remember, if you have questions, just put them in the chat, and we're going to come back around at the end. Definitely can, testify personally, having worked with Michael and continuing to work with Michael, that all of these things are continuous battles. But even with COVID, at that last rally that he was describing, we had reports were saying 150 people and more. So people are still coming out for the fights. People are still hungry for justice. And if you are building a movement, people will still come out. People will still be there. You just have to get them out there and engage with your community so that you can fight. You could just continue to fight no matter what is coming in the way. Just be safe. If there's a pandemic, be safe, but keep fighting. So thank you so much, Michael. And next, we're going to hear from another Florida organizer, because we all know how Florida has a reputation for a reason, right? So we're actually going to hear from Elizabeth Kay next. Liz is a rank and file UPS Teamster from Tampa. She participated in the Vote No contract campaign during the 2018 negotiations between the Teamsters and UPS. She's also a member of Freedom Road Socialist Organization. At the start of the COVID-19 crisis, she helped win protective equipment for workers in her building and is now part of the National Campaign for Hazard Pay. Liz, it's all you.
Thank you, Christina. Hey, everyone. As stated, my name is Liz. I live in Tampa, Florida, and I'm a UPS Teamster in Local 79. So today, I'm specifically speaking about the experiences of my coworkers and myself in our warehouse. But more important than simply what happened is the lessons that we've drawn from the experiences that we've had that could potentially be applied across many different workplaces, not limited to UPS. So I'll start off with just a little bit of a summary about what's happening in Florida and in Tampa, but it's been stated before, I'll state it again, the government of Florida has been fully a part of the Trump lackey camp and has done very little towards the prevention of spread. In Florida, there are nearly 40,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19, most of which are in South Florida. But Hillsborough County, where Tampa is, has its fair share. Throughout this crisis, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has taken the White House's lead and treats the virus as though it wasn't a serious pandemic capable of killing a great number of people. As of May 4th, the state of Florida has been reopening and has already confirmed more than 2,500 new cases. This is all to say that UPS broadly has followed the lead of President Donald Trump and his lackeys like Ron DeSantis. This becomes especially concerning when our union, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, is unwilling to engage in any struggle with the company. Our president, James Hoffa Jr., even disagreed with the popular demands for personal protective equipment, also known as PPE, in the beginning, and continues to oppose the popular demand for hazard pay. So as for the struggle for PPE, in early March, me and my coworkers under the group name Tampa Teamsters United started to make plans for how to address the potential issues of COVID in our building. We knew UPS wouldn't provide PPE for us out of the goodness of their hearts, as I personally, along with others, argued with the Tampa division manager, J.D. Myrick, about attaining gloves and hand sanitizer for workers, to which he claimed we, meaning the workers, wouldn't know how to use gloves correctly. We also knew the union wouldn't help us for aforementioned reasons. We began handing out information about our rights under OSHA and our national contract to PPE and a safe workplace. We began talking to all of our coworkers about PPE and the necessity of it. Several agreed with the position, and some even started helping us with hand billing or flyering. The company continued to ignore us or tried to argue with our points. As the situation in Florida and the entire country continued to escalate, so did the intense sentiment of our coworkers. One of the folks that was regularly helping with flyering and arguing with management called a protest on his own. He'd become so sick of the way the company and the union were treating us that he was going to go out to the side of the road after the shift one day, hold a sign shaming UPS all on his own, just by himself. Of course, the rest of us didn't just sit by. We encouraged his sentiment of fighting back and helped him organize the event. We even began flyering with information about it, inviting all of our coworkers to join us. Management, of course, became nervous as talk about bad press began, and most people in the building, were on fire with anger. They called some of us, including me, into a meeting on the day of the event and tried to reason with us. That just means continuing to make excuses for the lack of PPE. But we stood firm. We restated our demands for personal protective equipment, and this time we included the demand for masks. Last time we hadn't. The event happened, and while small, we spoke to the press and appeared on the news, got support from UPS drivers leaving the building that day, and got the whole building in an uproar. Everybody was talking about it. This scared management enough to finally take some action. And by the next week, we had gloves, N95 masks, and hand sanitizer. So this gets to the most important part. Not everybody works at UPS, obviously. So in our workplaces, what are some of the lessons that we learned from UPS that you can apply potentially? One, don't wait to take action. The virus isn't going to pause for you or your coworkers, and it's going to continue to, ravage on while we sit still. Two, trust and listen to the ideas of your coworkers. It's easy to think that you're alone with your opinions and wants, meaning being extremely angry that all of this is going on and nobody seems to care. But if you speak with your coworkers and listen, you'll find they share many of the same ideas. This is a starting point for you getting a group together of like-minded individuals so that way you can start organizing around specific issues, in our case, PPE. But we have to be careful not to attack any of our coworkers for having different opinions than us. The fight for PPE is twofold. We're fighting back to get what we need, and we're educating each other about the virus. The reason why this is the case is because both the federal and state governments aren't taking the crisis seriously, and neither is UPS. So we have to ask ourselves the question, if they aren't taking it seriously, why would all of our coworkers take it so seriously when they aren't being taught that it's a major event? But in other cases, the situation is opposite, and your coworkers are actually going to be ahead of you in their desire for action. Our coworker, who was about to go out on his own, took many of us by surprise when he called for the rally and contacted the media. However, the event was successful, and we were correct in turning his solo action into a large one that could affect our coworkers. 3, remain in contact with workers in your building or office. In order to coordinate, you have to remain in contact. And further, you should strive to create a singular plan that folks in the group can follow. This will strengthen your action immensely and create a firm block against the company or management. As a part of that, we must inform the rest of the workers, and you can do this in a couple of ways. Usually, we will stand outside the gates before the shift or after the shift and hand out flyers. But obviously, the coronavirus doesn't allow for that to happen. So if you insist on being able to hand things out, bring a mask, always wear it. Bring gloves, always wear them. Bring hand sanitizer and offer it to people, and make sure to sanitize any utensils that are used while you're out tabling and flyering. Like if you have a petition, make sure you bring a wipe or something to wipe the pen that 50 different people are potentially touching. But a new way that Tampa's been communicating with folks here is by an email list and a mass text messaging system. So we've been able to get out the information really efficiently because of it, and we get to respect social distancing. 4, you can use management for information under certain conditions. We have to be clear, no member of management is truly our friend. While some members of lower management can be friendly towards us and may even be sympathetic to our plight, if their job is on the line, you better believe they won't just throw you under the bus. They're going to drive the bus and hit you from the back. So it's okay if they want to reveal information to you about stuff going on behind the scenes, but never reveal your plan to them. Because when one member of management learns about a situation or really anything, every single member of management will learn it, and your plans could be ruined. 5, never fight for the least, fight for the most. At first, we weren't asking for masks. We thought maybe it was a unrealistic demand. But as per that coworker, once again, proving to us that, some people are on fire about this, he wanted masks. So we started promoting masks, and eventually we got them. So even if you don't end up winning absolutely everything that you want, it's better to start out with a good list of things, and then you can make concessions to the company as you see fit, or if you think that you're not in a position to continue struggling. Winning more also means that the company is going to have to struggle later on to kind of take back everything that was given to you as workers. And of course, when we're talking about these kinds of actions and about this kind of, we would call it a campaign for personal protective equipment, escalation is necessary. So when we start out, we ask management, hey, will you give us these materials? They're going to say no. And then from that point, you can call an event, you can spread the word, you can, escalate as you see fit. But don't start all the way at the top. Don't get ready to, get right out there unless that's what people are ready to do. Always pay attention to your surroundings and what your coworkers are feeling like. 6, you have a right to organize in your workplace. You have the right to whistleblow illegal activity in your workplace. We would later find out after the event that the reason why the event was smaller was not because it didn't have mass support, but because people were very afraid that they would get fired if they went out and, fought for PPE. So there was actually even a rumor going around that the organizers of the event would be fired. So that didn't happen because it's illegal. We have a right to organize and to whistleblow. But if the company decides to take action, kind of as we saw with Amazon a couple weeks ago, you have a legal suit on your hands, and you could, come after them that way. 7, and this is the final one, if you're in a unionized workplace, then you probably understand that we need a union organized on the basis of class struggle. So what does that mean? Well, our union, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, was of little, or maybe more correctly, no help during the fight for PPE. From the international stating explicitly they wouldn't negotiate with the company for PPE, to the international stating they wouldn't negotiate for hazard pay either. So, they made it pretty clear. However, we pay the salaries of our union leaders with our dues. They should represent us and fight the company alongside us. However, most unions are far more interested in cutting deals with the company than helping us workers. So where does that leave us? We need a radical change in our unions. We need a union that won't cut deals, but will galvanize the workers against the boss so we can win better working conditions and remind our bosses that we make their profits and fatten their pockets. So, it comes down to this. Those were the tips. And of course, ask any questions whenever that time comes. But if we do nothing, nothing will come to us and conditions will slowly or rapidly get worse. But if we choose to struggle, if we dare to struggle, then there's a chance we're going to win. I hope with the help of our experience in Tampa, you can go forward with all or some of these lessons and organize the South for a brighter future where our workplaces put people over profits. We're certainly taking these lessons into our national fight for hazard pay. So thank you all so much. And conditions will slowly or rapidly get worse. But if we choose to struggle,
always love
if we dare to struggle, then there's a chance we're going to win. I love
when you speak.
I hope with the help.
I'm a union steward at my school, and a lot of the points that you mentioned are extremely critical, and they're things that people just wouldn't know otherwise. So definitely, if you have questions, put them in the chat so that we can go back to them, because there are a lot of nuances. There are a lot of misunderstandings about unions and the power that they actually wield. But just to reiterate some of the really important things, it's not enough just to be a part of a union. You don't just pay dues and then ask, what can the union do for me? You're the union. The same way if you're fighting in the community, nobody else, you can't look to the cops to serve justice. You can't look to anybody else, not our elected officials, certainly not in the South. You're the one. You have to fight. You fight, you join your union, you become an active member, not just a dues paying member, but an active member, and you take the power back. You get into the positions of power. You build your union, and you build it with militant rank and file members, so that when a pandemic happens, you're not left wondering, am I going to die today to make the service go? Or am I going to be respected as a laborer who is bringing money to this corporation? You need to remind your boss that you're the one that makes things run. A lot of the times they will do empty threats. They'll threaten to fire you. They'll threaten all kinds of things. Learn your contract, because if you're in a union, they can't do that. That is the purpose of a union. Even if the leaders of your union are lazy or selling you out, those laws still exist. So you have to be confident. A lot of what I do as a steward is just bluffing, but it's the confidence, because I know that we do have some protections. A lot of people are too afraid to even make that step. So definitely want to thank Liz for bringing that up, because a lot of us, in the United States, pretty much all of us are workers. So these are things that every day, no matter what color you are, what's going on, you are affected by this. And like she also said, you got to learn to work with the people. Not everybody's going to be on your side, and it's important to know that those people might be a waste of time. But the majority of people who are working with you, they don't want to suffer either. So awesome job, Liz. But now we are going to jump out of Florida, take a break from that state, and we're actually going to head over to Texas with Jennifer. So also today is Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. But we have Jennifer, who is a mother. She's the mother of a 3-year-old and has been involved in community activism, also surrounding police brutality, for almost 4 years. So Jennifer holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of North Texas. And as we already know, mothers everywhere are just, they're supposed to be celebrating today, but as we've seen, especially with the most recent case with Ahmaud Arbery, it's not the same for Black mothers. Black mothers in the United States live in constant fear for their children's lives, and they have a choice. It's, what are we going to do? Well, Jennifer is a mother that is going to go out there and continue to fight for her child and for Black children everywhere. So Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for introducing me. Again, my name is Jennifer. I'm also co-chair of an organization called the Dallas Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, aka DARPA. So we work to end police crimes, as well as prison profiteering, racist and political repression, as well as economic injustice. So for here, and for us down here in Texas, we've noticed that the pandemic has really exacerbated a lot of the strain that's already felt by working people here and in the country generally. So we have naturally a for-profit healthcare industry that denies the human right to healthcare because you don't have access to insurance. Record numbers of joblessness, that tiny stimulus check that everyone received that maybe covered 1 month's rent, if that. And still left a lot of people unable to keep up with a lot of their bills. The prison industrial complex, including the ICE detention centers that are here in our state, and lots of people that are in jail still because they couldn't afford their bail. Just as a brief aside, Texas is actually the heart of the private prison industry here in the United States. Of the states that have private prison contracts, Texas was the first one to adopt private prisons in 1985. It has the largest number of people under state jurisdiction incarcerated in private prisons, and immigrants are a big majority of that population. And that's not also bringing in the need for childcare. Many lower cost childcare providers have actually closed down as a result of the pandemic because they just couldn't keep up. If people are out of work, then they can't pay for childcare, and they don't really need it at that point. So that's been really hard to find. Doesn't cost an arm and a leg. The mental health strain as well when it comes to social distancing and things like that. And just to talk a little bit more about the poverty situation in Texas generally. So Dallas County actually has 1 in 3 children in Dallas County are actually living in poverty. So that's 33%. And Dallas, if I remember correctly, actually has the 3rd highest child poverty rate in the entire nation. And it's just going to get worse from here because of the pandemic putting an even bigger strain on people and their incomes and people just not having jobs. That child poverty rate is going to increase from there. So there are really urgent issues that are felt hardest by poor and working class people and have especially impacted Black and Brown communities, especially here in Texas. Sorry, that is my 3-year-old. So this creates a really unique situation as we need to respond not only to the shifting and immediate needs of oppressed people, but also find ways to respond while keeping ourselves safe, right? 1 second. Mom, why'd you let him grab this entire pizza? Can you get him from him, please? Because he's lactose intolerant. Sorry, guys. So the existing situation as it is, of course, that the wealth gap has continued to grow and will continue to grow. We have the largest population of uninsured people in the entire state. And it also in the entire country. And also we rank the highest as far as healthcare bills and hospital bills. So the uninsured population also, and the numbers with that are directly connected to our proximity to the border and the high number of undocumented people that live here. They're unable to or afraid to seek medical attention, especially in Dallas-Fort Worth. That general area in the Metroplex is less than 50% white, but it is decreasing. Diversity in the city in the Metroplex is actually going down as the trends continue the way that they are with gentrification and things like that. But so far the numbers are 28% Latino at least, and 15% Black. Black and Brown people are losing their jobs first. They're also much more likely to live in outbreak hotspots and areas. When we look at maps of where we see the largest number of hospitalizations, the largest number of ventilator usage, the largest number of cases and increases in cases, we're seeing them largely in Southern Dallas, which is a minority part of the city. And we're also seeing, like I was saying, a large amount of discrepancies when we're seeing the mortality caused by SARS-CoV-2. So the pandemic also has especially highlighted a big rift that already existed in the state itself, which was between rural versus urban communities and rural and urban counties. So a lot of the urban counties, Dallas County, Travis, Harris, where, Dallas, Austin, and Houston are respectively, they're wanting to actually do a much more slow version of reopening and aren't really comfortable reopening anything right now, because they have more urban areas, and because they have it's more urban, there's a lot more cases in those parts of the state. In our rural parts of the state, there are smaller amounts of cases and smaller amounts of people dying, and it's also majority white, so they don't really care about making sure that Black people in South Dallas don't get sick, because it's not affecting them in Henderson County. And it's highlighted this big rift between the urban and rural counties, because the governor, who actually depends on the governor and all the people in the state government right now, they depend on rural counties and their vote to actually keep things running the way that they are. And because they depend on those votes, and they know that those people are the ones that actually want to reopen the state as quickly as possible, that's why we see this full charge ahead with reopening things. So this past Friday, actually, nail salons and barbershops are reopened, and last week restaurants reopened to 25% capacity. It was actually, Governor Abbott was actually caught on a hot mic saying that actually reopening all of these places will lead to a spike in cases, and that wasn't really ever their goal, was to not have any COVID cases. So he basically said the quiet part out loud, which is that we know that this is going to lead to more and more working people's deaths, especially Black and brown working people's deaths, but it doesn't really matter to us. And of course, Texas is also home to the story that's become a national kind of spectacle, where this woman actually reopened her salon before she was given the go-ahead to, and went to jail and was in jail for a total of 48 hours, served 48 hours of her 7-day sentence, and was actually released by the Supreme Court of the state. While at the same time, actually, the regulatory board for barbershops and nail salons and cosmetology here in Texas was actually publicly shaming people on their Facebook page by tagging them if they had heard a rumor that somebody was doing hair out of their house or anything like that. So, it's funny, we see, and the majority of people who were tagged by this regulatory board of the state to shame them publicly online were Latino and Black. There's actually a case of 2 women in Laredo, Texas, who were doing hair out of their apartments, or their houses rather, and they actually wound up getting fined and going to jail, have not been released, whereas this woman from North Dallas, who's very rich and white and had a GoFundMe set up for herself before everything even happened, was able to get out of jail in 48 hours. So we can see the discrepancy here, and how the way that they're enforcing this law, and how Governor Abbott literally went behind himself and rewrote his executive order to take jail time out of it, so that Shelley Luther would have no reason to deal with jail. But with all of that against us, our response for that, so here, the Dallas Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, we've actually called for a mass release of prisoners and ICE detainees across the state of Texas, as well as a cancellation completely on rents and mortgages. We've tried to also use this period of higher online activity to share skills around digital media production. So we had a workshop on flyer making using Inkscape, since Canva has poor export options to actually that is designed to really lock users into their platform. In April, we were part of 2 actions. So first, it was Raíces, North Texas Dream Team, and Texas Poor People's Campaign, as well as Black Youth Project 100 and others. We actually formed a car caravan which rallied around North Texas to Prairieland Detention Center, Lou Sterrett Jail, and Henry Wade Juvenile Detention Center to demand the mass release of detainees. We've also had places lying about the confirmed number of cases that are inside, telling detainees one thing and then telling loved ones on the outside that inside is actually the safest they can be, when in reality they're telling the detainees that actually a lot of people are getting sick in here. So later on in April, we actually joined a national call to cancel the rent with local organizers from Black Youth Project 100 and the Party for Socialism and Liberation. We were driving through South Dallas and making our way downtown to City Hall. This spent much more time driving through areas where we got many cheers and also raised fists of solidarity from onlookers. This month was actually there was national outrage over the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. So just a couple of days ago, we actually participated in hashtag Run with Ahmaud and ran across a major bridge in front of the courthouse, all calling for justice in this modern day lynching. So it's a really challenging time for everyone, but as organizers, we really have to fight for demands that serve the people and reveal how capitalist interests have actually made a terrible situation already that much more terrible for us. If we here in Dallas have one message for organizers, it's that we can always adapt to changing conditions. And although everyone may feel alienated from their communities right now, we have to keep working to keep those bonds strong and to stick together. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And thanks for spending your Mother's Day here with all of us who are fighting. Especially, since so many mothers are affected by the terror that we're talking about when we talk about police brutality, when we talk about organizing in the South, but across the nation with that kind of stuff. And also just want to reiterate your point of, especially what you ended on with, it does feel like we're being isolated from our communities because we are in quarantine, literally isolating. But just like Liz said, just like Michael said, and just like Jennifer mentioned, there are still people out there. People still want to fight. It just takes dedicated leaders and organizers to show the way. So on that note, we are going to have our final panelist, who is in the area in the South that's been hit the hardest by COVID, New Orleans. So Quest is a trans activist and low-wage service industry worker for New Orleans. She joined Freedom Road Socialist Organization in 2019 and is also a member of Southerners on New Ground. During the pandemic, she has worked with Southern Solidarity, a grassroots effort to serve the unhoused community in New Orleans with emergency relief. So Quest, we can't wait to hear your experience.
All right, hello everyone, and especially warm greeting to all the comrades and friends here in the South, getting ready for what's shaping up to be another very hot summer. The realities of our lives have shifted on a weekly basis in the past couple of months. But we are seeing that the more things change, the more they stay the same. The health and economic crisis have shined a new light on the dictatorship that we live under, the dictatorship of prisons, oil, war, and genocide. 302 years ago to the week, New Orleans was founded as a colony on land that was known as Bulbancha, a Choctaw word that means land of many tongues. This land brought together Homa, Biloxi, Choctaw, Chitimacha, and many other indigenous peoples. But within 2 years, the land was transformed by African labor into the town that would soon, within the century, become the largest slave port in North America. City officials have used the tricentennial, which happened 2 years ago, to bolster New Orleans' $10 billion tourism industry. But we know that this history is what sets the stage for New Orleans recently having the highest incarceration rate in the country, and for rents in the city to have doubled in the last 20 years. and for unemployment rates to be over 50% for the Black majority in the city. It's this history of slavery and colonization, which is codified by the state locally and on the state level in too many ways to list, that has laid the foundation for the human and social catastrophe of Hurricane Katrina and the resulting brutal wave of disaster capitalism that attacked public and affordable housing, public schools, unions, wages, fueled the prison industrial complex. Nearly 100,000 Black New Orleanians have never returned to New Orleans after Katrina. And gentrification and mass incarceration have joined hands as the twin evils of American apartheid. All this is important for context. This land and its people have known the challenges of dealing with capitalism and extreme social crisis long before March 2020. On February 25th, New Orleans celebrated Fat Tuesday, the final day of a month-long carnival in New Orleans, where roughly 1.5 million people descend on New Orleans every year. So this is just 2 weeks before schools were closed in the city. Schools were closed across the state, and a stay-at-home order was ordered across the state, and it became clear that Louisiana had the highest rates of infection, not only in the South, but in the country and consequently in the world, because of the recent influx of foreign travel, in New Orleans. So as of today, there have been over 32,000 cases confirmed in New Orleans and 2,200 deaths. Many events have been canceled. Basically, the tourism economy has been shut down, leaving a large hospitality workforce, service industry workforce, threatened by unemployment and a failing economic system. And death rates elsewhere in Louisiana, particularly in industrial centers, such as an area of land known as Cancer Alley because of its high rates of industrial pollution, have been hit particularly hard by COVID-19. So yeah, the lockdown started in mid-March, and it kind of became clear to activists locally that this lockdown, although it was necessary, would end up, although some kind of action was necessary, that the history has shown that these types of responses are always colored by the systems of oppression in Louisiana. Already we've seen racist enforcement of these laws, so that Black New Orleanians who are celebrating the lives of those lost through traditional practices like second lines have been criminalized and penalized, while at the same time white priests of mega churches and stuff have been able to hold large 100-member congregations without repercussion. So what I'm kind of doing today is just running through a list of what we've seen so far in the response of the people, and some of the stuff that's given us hope and some of the challenges that we face. One such initiative has been Southern Solidarity, which in my introduction mentioned I've been working with. This started the 3 days after the lockdown was announced. It was mobilized by a local Black queer woman, and most of the operations have been out of this woman's home, and all the volunteers are mostly furloughed workers or other essential workers who have been juggling working during COVID-19 and doing this. And it was mobilized because it became clear that there was already a exponentially large houseless population. I mentioned the high rent prices in New Orleans, high and rising rent prices in New Orleans, and a lot of them are concentrated in the tourist areas of New Orleans. And these tourist areas kind of turned overnight into a ghost town. And it became clear very fast that the city's response was inadequate and very slow. So Southern Solidarity has been mobilized to gather resources from across the community, including food, supplies, sanitation supplies, health supplies, and deliver them directly to this houseless population at the various encampments and scattered individuals across the town. So volunteers will get in trucks and ride around basically for an evening, delivering these supplies, and that has proved to be really effective based on the feedback we've received. We've also had a lot of success with fundraising, and we've also made a point and kind of taken pride in our contribution in terms of increasing awareness of social distancing and increasing awareness of how to stay safe during the crisis, and also delivering the supplies that are necessary for that. So yeah, the first day was March 20th, and it's been going on every day since then, making today day 50. So even with that, it's a big feat, or we see it as a big feat, and but also see it as only the beginning. The collective is kind of already committed to taking this work to the next step in many ways. One way is through some trainings and skill buildings in terms of stuff like harm reduction, to better know how to navigate situations with drugs, and how to reduce the harm, and that happens every day related to drugs. And we're also trying to increase awareness among volunteers, but also to spread this to the wider community about racism and gender oppression. And the collective has also been really encouraged and inspired by the work of groups like Moms for Housing, Mother's Day shout out, Moms for Housing in Oakland, who have successfully shown a model of how to occupy homes, how to create a large-scale campaign around occupying homes that are being, exploited by the forces of gentrification. So I could say much more about Southern Solidarity, but I'm gonna move on, another thing that we've seen in the past week is a strike by sanitation workers, which is a very massive deal. This started by workers who are, the center of the workers is in New Orleans East, so kind of out of the center of the city. So these are workers who a lot have to bus long distances across the city to get to their work site. And it was started because the company wasn't giving, the company being Metro-wide service, wasn't giving adequate PPE and hasn't given any hazard pay. And also the trucks are in bad quality, bad condition, and actually leak hydraulic fluids onto the workers. And so the demands were that the wage be increased from $10.25 currently to $15 an hour, and that in addition, every week the workers get $150 in hazard pay, and also that the trucks be fixed and that the workers be provided PPE on a daily and adequate basis. And so there's been a large amount of support for the workers. They've gotten a good amount of coverage over the past week, and have organized for community support, some phone zaps to call the mayor, to call officials, to call the company, to show that the community's on their side. They're having a daily picket, which again is kind of far out of the city, so it's again a good example of people being able to do it, and it's all socially distanced, and masks are required for the picket. And they've also had success with a petition and a strike fund in terms of community support. So that has given us a lot of encouragement and excitement about what the South is looking like so far. I will skip over to another mutual aid group, Las Familias Unidas, is a immigrant-based community group that hosts a transition house even before the crisis. But since the crisis, they've made some local partners and shifted similarly to Southern Solidarity to emergency relief. And they've been also really successful in bringing together a lot of resources for the large immigrant population, mostly from Central American countries, to bring them food at a time when, even though our stimulus checks are not enough, immigrant families, a lot of undocumented families aren't getting anything. And La Familias Unidas has done a great job about raising the point about solidarity and building connections between those who have access to resources and those who don't have access to those same resources. And we've just been really encouraged by the amount of the emphasis on building solidarity that has happened since the COVID-19 crisis. I think New Orleans, because of the history I talked about earlier, has, even in recent history, had a lot of examples of how to navigate crisis as a community, how to build solidarity in times when community is under direct attack. And yeah, we're building on that legacy. One more example that we've been involved with locally is Trans and Gender Nonconforming People's COVID Crisis Fund, which is redirecting funds and resources to trans and gender nonconforming. There's a really big population here in New Orleans, and a lot are among some of the most at-risk sectors of society, including sex workers, immunocompromised people, formerly incarcerated people, undocumented trans and gender nonconforming people, houseless and housing insecure people, and also because of hiring discrimination, unemployment, like the spike in unemployment, presents itself as a threat to us as a community in a particular way. And so this Trans and Gender Nonconforming Relief Fund has done a great job at redistributing thousands of dollars in relief to trans and gender nonconforming people in need, and is continuing to build on that work and emphasize solidarity. It has given a direct solidarity donations to organizations that deal particularly with undocumented trans and gender nonconforming people, as well as a actually Ugandan organization for trans sex workers. So it's presented a unique opportunity to build international solidarity in a time when, this is a worldwide crisis. And I believe that the particular conditions of the South and the wisdom that is passed down through the struggle in the South, struggles for freedom in the South, have a lot to offer not only our communities, but the country and the world at large. And so I'll leave it at that. Thank you all. You're so inspiring. And let's move to Tony.
All right, y'all. So we have now heard from all of our panelists. We are doing heavy work in the South. I've been going through the Facebook live feed comments, and so we're just gonna go right into questions from people who have been watching. So the first one that I see on my end is, what differences, if any, have there been in terms of the impact of COVID on the masses in the South in comparison to other areas of the country? What accounts for these differences? So I'm just going to jump in with this one, and then we can pass it on to other people too. But this one, I just think that some of the main differences just go back to that national question, of the South. What does the South mean? The South has a history of slavery, of literal slavery, violence and oppression, and all of the main differences go back to having the remnants of political oppression through Jim Crow and all of the leftover material side effects from redlining and separating neighborhoods and just leftover racism. It's where all of the Black Americans are for the most part, but because of that, we have extremely hostile just lawmakers and extremely hostile Republican terror is what it really is. But also, I know that Michael Sampson can definitely jump in on this one, so I'm going to pass it to him too.
Yeah, I think especially with what you were saying, Christina, how, due to national oppression, you have, voting blocks like of African Americans that have been systematically disenfranchised from any type of political power. So you have these extreme kind of right-wing governments in power in Florida and Georgia, Mississippi, and other states across the South that leads to that. And as well, let's take an example in Georgia. Georgia was the first state to, like, let's say, open up, and say, hey, we're gonna, that, for example, that governor didn't even believe didn't even understand that you could carry COVID without, showing symptoms and being asymptomatic. But, at the end of April, 80% of the people who were hospitalized for COVID in Georgia were Black. You know, you could see that if it was 80% of those people who were hospitalized were in like more suburban areas, you probably wouldn't have had such a rush to open up in the South. And then the Black Belt African American nation, due to national oppression, corporations basically get so much super profits from these areas that, shutting down of the economy to them is just, like flat out horrible. You know what I'm saying? So I think that plays a huge part of it. The fact that these areas in the Black Belt, you already have so much lack of funding to healthcare, lack of funding to education. You already have such a abysmal public safety net infrastructure already in place. So you put that on top of a national pandemic, that leads to like really horrible results. So I think that kind of shows the reason why you've seen in the South a more rush to open up, because the wealthy, it's just United States, the wealthy is in power everywhere, but especially in the South, there's no check really on them. And like the people, the workers, like we're the ones like left to kind of fend for ourselves.
Yes, definitely. And I know Liz had some input on this one as well. So go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually back up what Mike was saying and add that the unionization rate for the South compared to the rest of the United States is almost half, which means that, Mike mentioned that there's not really a check for the rich, and that's absolutely the truth. Even in our organized workplaces where the trade union leaders don't really work in our favor all the time, people without unions are in an even more vulnerable position. And in the South, that means African Americans and Latinos. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Definitely great points. So I'm just going to keep going through these questions. And this one, not only do I think it's a great question, I kind of feel like it's the question. So no pressure, everybody. But in what ways can we utilize the conditions brought on by COVID, particularly in areas where state leadership are pushing forward plans or have already reopened most of the economy, to advance people's thinking? In other words, how can we sum up these attacks properly with the masses? So that really is the question that we do need to be asking ourselves. I guess I'll start it off because I've had longer to look at the question. So I think one material way that we can do it, and it bounces perfectly off of what Liz was just saying, is just workforce organizing and trying to get people to understand the value of their labor, especially since this can sum up these attacks properly with told people that they are considered non-essential. Your government literally is telling you that you're not important enough to survive. And then the prize for being essential is that you get to potentially contract a fatal disease without hazard pay. Told people that they are considered non-essential. So I really, your government literally is telling you to kind of jump onto that one and kind of take that there. Can everybody give me one moment, folks? I feel like we're having technical difficulties, maybe. 1 second. Go ahead. We're going to pass it to you for that question. Again, the question is, how do we get the masses specifically using COVID as the catalyst to come over to our line of thinking?
Yeah, well, one, I think it's a great question, and there's so many answers to it, because there's as many answers to it as there are masses. But I think it's important to point out that a system and a society that there's so many answers that both couldn't handle this, because there's crisis, as many answers to it as there, and mismanaged it so badly so as to make it worse, is more the reason for us to unite with one another, for more the reason for us to strengthen our communities and empower our communities to keep us safe when we can. I think prisons provide a really clear example of this, that the fact that the prisons across the country, but I think particularly in the South, like for example, in Louisiana, there's some prisons that have 100% infection of COVID, or near 100%. The fact that that's possible is a clear example why prisons don't work, and prisons are basically by their nature death traps. They're even more so during COVID, or maybe it's more clear, but already they were genocidal tools, and COVID has just put a new light on that.
Definitely, that is another avenue for sure. And then I know Jennifer over in Texas also wanted to offer an answer to that question. So I'm going to pass it to Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you. So for us in Texas, really, it's honestly just like paying attention to what state and local authorities are saying about this crisis and how they're downplaying it, or straight up just not taking it seriously at all. We first made headlines about our government officials not really taking this very seriously when I can't remember like his exact title, but he was basically like underneath the attorney general for the state. And he literally went on national television saying that people who are elderly should sacrifice themselves to coronavirus to, make the economy better, as well as watching people, watching what urban county leaders and county judges are doing, and seeing how the patchwork system that they have set up, where everything is so federalized, where county judges are making laws for their counties and counties touch one another. Eventually, like, we are realizing that viruses don't respect things like county lines because they're crossing over, and seeing this, watching it fall apart from the inside, and seeing how it's not working for all of us, and being able to point to it as a concrete example for why things are not working the way that they are, and they can't. Especially when the governor got caught on a hot mic saying that he's aware that cases will go up when they reopen the state, but they need to reopen it anyway. Put a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. Watching how the unemployment system has crashed on multiple millions of Texans while they try to get their unemployment insurance so that they can at least feed themselves, has pointed out a glaring issue and a glaring problem with the entire even way that they're helping the system limp along isn't very conducive to really anything. It isn't working for us either. Seeing how the only way that you can not accept your old job back, even if you're worried about coronavirus, is if somebody in your family has it, like directly in your household, You have to also be above the age of 65, or you have to have coronavirus. Those are the 3 reasons that you have to not go back to work if you're offered your job back. Those are the only ones they're accepting, and seeing how that's not working for people either, and seeing how angry people are getting about that. I mean, it's being able to see the problems that are happening and pointing them out. And sorry, my son thinks this is hilarious what he's watching right now. I know, it's so funny and silly. Okay, sorry. So it's really just about seeing them make these terrible decisions that aren't going to go well, and pointing it out to everybody else and being like, see, the emperor has no clothes. That's really it.
So again, amazing, very, very good question. So I am glad that we took a little more time on that one. The only thing that I would add is definitely point out all of the things, that are just visibly failing in front of us at the hands of our system that we have right now, but also being the educators to show these people that it can be better and it can be different. And the only way is through a people's movement and socialism. So great question. But another really great question is, what's it look like to fight Southern patriarchy? So I love this question, but I feel like other people on our panel can start this one off. So I'm going to see if any, just because I can see y'all, just raise your hand if you want to be the one to start this one off. Yes, there we go. Right, we're going to pass it off to Liz.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that in my workplace, actually, there are many mothers who work at UPS. I think that there's this idea that women don't work at UPS, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm literally surrounded by women all day long. And I would say that many of the mothers have been very concerned for, their family members whenever they'll be like returning home from work. I actually had a coworker who didn't come into work literally the past month. She just came in this past week, kind of strolled into work. The rest of us thought something awful happened. And she was like, no, I just refuse to go to work. I will not get my children sick. I will not get my partner sick. I will not, do anything like that to risk their lives. And, I think that in itself is not like necessarily a good idea to follow, because it could put yourself at risk for losing your job or a bunch of other like horrible conditions. However, understanding that people have those opinions is one of the primary ways that we can get them to join us in our struggles, right? As we're trying to fight back, we can say to people like, hey, I know that you're worried about your children or whatever, like, let's fight for PPE in our workplace. Let's make sure that you don't have to go home and that there's, sure chance that your children or your partner or whoever will get sick. So, there are ways, and of course, I'm speaking specifically in a workplace setting, there are ways that we can organize in the workplace in order to, combat this idea that like mothers somehow just won't, communicably, what am I looking for? Give other people the disease, So I think that that would be a way. Organize in your workplace, make sure people can be safe there.
Definitely. And I love that you brought up that UPS is full of women, especially mothers. That was, maybe I have some patriarchy blinders on too, because that actually did surprise me. I learned this years ago, but before I knew it, it did actually surprise me in a great way, though, because women in the workforce is where you start to see some momentum. And then also, so we talk about workforce, and then I'm just going to touch on in the community what it looks like. The South is dominated for the most part by just not only right-winger conservative maniacs, but also Christian right-wing conservative maniacs. So we have a lot of pushback from churches. Churches actually have a strange amount of political power and economic power, especially in a city like Jacksonville, Florida. For some reason, they own most of our downtown area. I'm not sure exactly the history about why that is, but they own the properties in most of our city. So we also had the highest transgender murder rate in Jacksonville, Florida in 2018. And so obviously, you know, they're already being targeted. It was all Black trans women. And our police, on top of that, misgendered every single one of them, even though we demanded they follow Matt Shepard, James Byrd Jr. law, which says you have to gender them by what they went by so that witnesses know who you're referring to. They were completely hostile when that's a very simple demand, and they were very, very hostile to that. And even went out of their way to organize town halls to try and tell us that we're overreacting, that it's not a serial killer, this, that, and the other thing. But in reality, what we can be doing is, instead of siphoning all of our money to a police force that doesn't care about issues that women and non-conforming people face, we could be giving our funds, our resources and money to centers that actually are specific for transgender women so that they can have resources. We also had a human rights ordinance that passed in 2017 that was supposed to help with LGBT people and employment opportunities. And we just found out this year that somebody somewhere dropped the ball, and now it's not effective anymore. So employment opportunities and job opportunities for LGBT people and gender nonconforming people just don't really even exist for the most part, because there's open discrimination here. So what it looks like fighting patriarchy in the South is a full-time job. It's very hostile and disgusting. But great question, because it's one of my favorite battles to be a part of. So we're going to move on, and this is another good question. Have you seen an uptick in actions taken by unorganized workers? How can those of us working in the union movement contribute to organizing the unorganized? So for this one, I'm going to just pass it to Michael Sampson, because I know you work with AFSCME and we haven't heard from you in a while. So it's all you.
Well, I guess I've, from my experience, I've seen a lot of, due to COVID, there's been a lot of, issues in regards to PPE, lack of personal protective equipment, but also, being forced to go to work in a place that isn't necessarily socially distant. So, I mean, you have seen a lot more unorganized people kind of going to unions or even doing their own thing in regards to speaking out. Because especially, COVID is a deadly pandemic that, affects everybody. And oftentimes, those, workers who are in unions are kind of the vehicle you have to fight back. They might be crappy vehicles that you have to get better, but they are the vehicle. And a lot of unorganized workers don't even have that vehicle that even exists. But I think you have seen an uptick in that. I think the best way to support those is to show solidarity, get your locals or your internationals to, support those who are trying to organize a union or just trying to fight. We have, I think our union, I think we had like less than 7% in regards to private sector unionization across the country. But I think that, comrades like Liz and folks in the folks, Teamsters, they've shown us an example of like rank and file unionism, how you can, form together to fight, and how you can, make sure that, that you have that representation and that you can get folks together to even like speak out and get basic PPE, basic social distancing.
All right. Perfect response. And then I know Liz wanted to jump onto this one as well. So Liz, go ahead.
Sorry about speaking so much. I just wanted to add on to this question. I think that, Mike mentioned about the uptick, but I would just add, as unionized workers, one, we have to be able to set the example, right? We have to be able to be in the fight in order to tell others, yeah, be in the fight. Otherwise it's, it falls on deaf ears. Why should anybody trust you? Two, first and foremost, we have to have control of our own unions, right? And as I mentioned before, put them on that class struggle basis before we can truly help the unorganized workers. We can definitely show solidarity, but if we want those workplaces to be organized in the same way that ours are, we have to have control of them. For example, Amazon is not a unionized workplace. UPS is a unionized workplace. And maybe if the IBT, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, wasn't so weak and didn't love the company so much, then we would be able to organize Amazon and those workers would immediately have that vehicle. So I just wanted to add that.
All right, so I'm just gonna hit 2 more questions, but I do wanna note that there is a question in the chat that asks, it brings up the point that theory is not easy for a lot of the masses to digest, which we all know and definitely encountered. And do we have any resources that are more easily digestible? Short answer is yes. So let's try to make sure that we post some links to some readings in the chat after this. Give me 1 second here. Okay, one is what ways can we utilize the effective responses of socialist countries to help build solidarity with their people while also dispelling the myths perpetuated by US media? I feel like the numbers will speak for themselves on that one. You know, it's people can choose to be ignorant, but that is definitely a choice at that point. So you know, they're that's just it. You know, it speaks for itself. And then I guess our job is to just be educated on those numbers in those countries, and ready to have those conversations. Samson, though, I definitely know he wants to jump in on that one. So go ahead.
Yeah, pretty quick. You know, I think one way to show the contradictions, I mean, because, you know, U.S. propaganda, you know, Western propaganda is going to just show you how, it tells you how horrible these countries are, like Cuba, China, you know, even Venezuela. You can point out, you know, their responses in regards to capitalist countries' responses and how the numbers are so much worse, but also the fact that those places strive in their best to have a centrally planned economy that is able to divert resources where they need to be. And in America, we don't have North America, we don't have a centrally planned economy. We have a economy ran on anarchy, which is why the stock market crashed within a week or so of fears of this pandemic. So you have to point out those contradictions and how Cuba is able to send so much aid to other countries. China is sending aid, PPE, to the United States. Governor of Maryland is having to get PPE shipment, or the governor of New York or whatever has to go to China for ventilators. I mean, that just shows you how, you know, how these other countries, due to them having a socialist economy and having people who win the fight for people, they're more efficient at meeting the needs of the people, as opposed to, you know, the United States. Trump is trying to send everybody to work, and it's comfortable if millions die as long as they can turn a profit.
I mean, yeah, you know, clearly the man cares about the economy, but is, you know, we are the economy. Workers produce the value that comes in. So we got to just always remind people of that our lives actually are literally more valuable than anything else that he could argue against that. And then I know Quest wanted to add to this. Did you still want to add something? Okay.
Yeah, real quick. I think that now is like a really unique opportunity to build that socialist solidarity, because just speaking from personal experience, when I learned that Cuba offered to send doctors in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, but George Bush obviously denied that. This was before I was, you know, knew anything about socialism or socialist countries. And that already gave me a good disposition towards Cuba, because I understand why they did it. And I was learning about what the principles of socialist solidarity, socialist internationalism are about. And socialist countries right now are doing similar things for people around the world. And I think emphasizing the solidarity, not just on a local level, but on a world level, is a really powerful weapon that we have, that the socialist countries have offered us.
Perfect responses. And a really good question too, because yeah, that is definitely, this is a great chance to try to tell the media to stop picking on socialist countries. But we're coming up to our last question. This is a good one to end off on. So we know that when the pandemic ends, we're not going back to normal. That is a fact. Either we go to a worse situation, which is what Trump has in mind, or we fight for a better situation. Are the struggles you're engaged in laying the groundwork for that better situation? So that's a good question to just take away, to ask ourselves, and to kind of keep with us every day, not to just answer in a panel. Obviously we'd like to think that it is, but it's not just an idealistic question. It's a material question. What are we actually actively doing to build our communities and become stronger? And I think every panelist has definitely hit on this in a way. So the one thing that I'm just going to add is, or not add, but emphasize is the worker struggle, building really militant union workers and building shop floor struggle, and having them understand that it's, again, not enough to be in a union, but to be active in your union and to be a leader in your union, and not to trust others to be your savior, kind of. We really can't rely on anyone but ourselves. That's why we need to be really vigilant about our theory, even though it is hard to digest, but just having those study groups, continually understanding that we cannot deviate from the strategy too far. I mean, we can find ways to meet people and meet the masses, but we cannot abandon our end goal, which is a socialist republic here in the United States. And with pandemics like this, we're just one step closer. So it's a matter of clearly our officials don't have control of the chaos right now. It's a matter of us finding how we can step in and control things when they're completely out of control, because that's really what people are looking for. So that's what I'll add, but I'll toss it to our panelists. Did anybody want to volunteer to step in? Just raise your hand. Nope. Oh. Is that it? Okay, so I have Mike and then Quest. So Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I think in terms of laying the framework, I mean, a lot of the campaigns we doing in Jacksonville around community control of the police and fighting against police crimes, we've already been doing. But I think what the pandemic has kind of shown has opened up an avenue of work around freeing those who are incarcerated. I think that's kind of laid the groundwork for some future organizing that we're going to be a part of, but also, showing solidarity with those who are incarcerated. I think that kind of lays the groundwork. And I think there was a kind of an earlier question about social distance organizing and things we can take from it. I think some practical points, caravan protest, I think is something that we could have been doing way before. We were also had to be socially distant. Is actually a tactic that right wingers do in the South. They have these like Confederate days where they're like drive on the highway with their motorbikes and all that other shit. They've been doing that for a while, but I think something that, it's a tactic that we can definitely use, and it's easy for folks to participate in. And also I think what, COVID has done is also shown us, we have Zoom, we have conference calls, we have these means of talking to people, keeping in contact with people that necessarily we haven't really used because we prefer the face-to-face. And I think face-to-face events, face-to-face meetings are always like priority that we should always try to strive for. But, Zoom and conference calls are means to keep communication with people, and it can be easier for some folks who may have issues with transportation. and whatnot to get involved with something that your organization is doing. So I think COVID has kind of shown us a lot, shown us what the system can do and what they won't do, and it's up to us as socialists and communists to really identify that and meet the masses where they're at, and kind of pull them to a more radical program that is going to lead to them being free and everyone else being free.
Perfect. And Quest, I know you wanted to jump in on this one.
Yeah, I just wanted to reemphasize that being from a city where social crises are a reoccurring thing, that living through an example of communities being resilient, living through examples of communities staying together when our first question is like, whenever COVID comes, it's like, oh my God, am I gonna survive this crisis? Living through these crises makes us stronger. That's why I've been so encouraged by the mutual aid kind of how it's flourished in New Orleans, and that those strong communities will be necessary. I mean, hurricane season's coming up for us, and workers in New Orleans are acutely aware of that. So we're always trying to prepare ourselves more for the next fight. So ahead.
Alrighty, y'all. So that was a great question to end on. And this is the end of our stream on COVID in the South. As we, wrap up, say goodbye, just a couple of things, and I'm really glad that that question got asked, because that was going to be kind of the idea that I wanted everyone to leave off on. But yeah, you want to go out into your community and show them that we're the ones who care, that the socialists are the ones who care, that the communists are the ones who care. They already see every day that the current structure does not care about them. Again, they're literally being called non-essential at this point, and then the essential workers are being punished for the good of the economy. So now is a perfect time to remind them that, hey, there actually is a group that is organized, that does have actual viable material ideas to make our society better. And we care about what you're going through as a mother. We care about what you're going through as an oppressed nationality, LGBT person. We are the people who are there to fight for you, and we need you to fight for yourself with us. So these are the things that you need to take away from this. We have our own hurdles in the South specifically, but we know the whole country is suffering right now. Be the leaders out there. Don't be afraid to struggle, dare to win, and we will win, especially when the government is shooting itself in the foot right now, basically. So it's going to take time, but we've got nothing but time. So just keep fighting, keep being vigilant, and I guess that's it. We're just going to say bye from the South, y'all.